Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the next in the series of the Jason's Take On webinars, joining myself, Jason Noble over here in the UK, and my co-host, Jason Whitehead over there in the US. We'd like to welcome everybody. We've got a nice global audience again, which is always good. Just a few quick pointers. We're targeting a max time of about 45 minutes for the webinar. We've had some questions in from the audience ahead of time, which is great. We will endeavor to answer those. If there are any questions that do come up during the conversation between Jason and I, please do put them in the Q&A box and we will endeavor to answer them. Just a recap as to why we're doing this series. This is the fifth in our series of customer success focused webinars. The one today is around how you build and foster trusted relationships with customers. Jason and I know each other through the customer success community. We are both super passionate about customer success and have been here since before it was called customer success. So a good few years experience across a number of different areas in business. And I think importantly, we're both seeing and continue to see the value that customer success individuals, professionals and functions are bringing to business and to investors and to customers. And we also see a lot of the challenges that are coming around through customer success and working with our own customers and each other and our colleagues and peers looking at these and how you address these. And really our webinar series is some of the challenges that we've seen and talking through people and how you'd get around these. We just want to say as well, we have created a brand new LinkedIn group where we can really get you guys to join in, continue the conversation post the webinars and in between the monthly webinars we're doing. So please do, we will provide links in the emails that we send out afterwards to where the group is, but please do join that. If there's any questions that come up there, any thoughts you have, please do share them with the group there. And there's also a Twitter handle as well. So on a similar vein there, all about the Jason's Take On, but it's for us continuing the conversation outside of this. We are also, for our people that have subscribed and subscribed up to the weekly newsletter or the email newsletter that goes out, we are going to send out a note later this week that will have details on these and the links. And we are starting to think about how we can do additional subscriber only content, not just monthly, but potentially fortnightly or bi-weekly, as my American friends like to call it. So there'll be additional information and different content that you get through that. So please do, when you see the emails coming there, if you want to hear more, please do join the conversations, either through the subscription or through LinkedIn and Twitter. We really love the conversations, and there's a lot in customer success around the community and understanding what people's challenges are. So we're really excited about this. Very quick intro to myself. So I'm Jason Noble, based over here in London in the UK. I've been around in the technology space now for 20 years-ish. I spent my career in a number of different customer-facing roles, including program management, service delivery, account management, customer service, and over the last probably 7-8 years, accumulating kind of under the umbrella of customer success as business has evolved there. I've really spent the last probably 6 or 7 years working with more niche technology startups, helping them both create, build, and lead their customer success functions and grow them globally. So going either from an initial growth phase up to scale up, looking at the different stages of customer success maturity. I've also worked with a number of enterprise organizations, the likes of Sony, SunGard, and Elsevier, and I've seen the challenges from legacy organizations, more legacy organizations, as to what they do around customer success and some of the different nuances you get there when you're looking at global enterprises and global customers. And I've recently finished with Good Lord, kind of now looking at some consultancy work. So I'm really open to any future opportunities. Jason, quick intro for yourself.
Great, thanks, Jason. My name is Jason Whitehead, based here in Washington, D.C., and I too have been in the technology space for over 20 years. A lot of my early career was focused around large-scale ERP, CRM projects and implementations and global software, and then spent a lot of time actually working on software adoption and saying, how do we get people to use the system in a way to create value once the system is live? Right now, I do a lot of training and consulting, both for software adoption and helping buyers of software set up their own internal success teams, as well as working with customer success teams for SaaS vendors and other organizations selling on a subscription basis. So really excited to be here and really love doing this series with you, Jason. So thanks very much. Back to you.
Excellent. Guys, as I said, the topic for today is around building customer relationships, trusted customer relationships. As our regular listeners will know, what we like to do is pose a bold question. It's all about be bold for our customer success leaders, but the bold question that we're posing to you guys today is what would you do differently in your relationships with customers from tomorrow? So based on what we talked through, the conversations we have, the questions, what would you do with those relationships differently going forward tomorrow? So please have a think about that. What we'll do is at the end of the episode, we will give you 3 specific actions that we've got for how you can increase the value of those trusted relationships. And we'd love your feedback in the LinkedIn group as well and on Twitter. What are the bold action that you can do from that? So Jason, I'm gonna throw the first question to you, and I think this one really helps us kind of set the context. Have you, in your experience working with your customers, in your education, are there any experiences you've had that you can share around the value of relationships and how the value of relationships is so critical?
Yep, absolutely. And thank you for asking that. And before I jump in, I'd also like for everyone who's listening to think about what has been the best experience you've ever had working with a group or a team, and what has been the absolute worst experience you've ever had, and what are some of the differences between these. And when you start to think of this and you look at both the experience itself, but also the value of the relationships that you had, I think that you'll start to see that there's real value both in personal enjoyment and lack of stress and having great relationships, but also in productivity and the outcome. And many organizations and many individuals, they don't spend enough time thinking about how to build these really effective, productive relationships or why. But an experience that I had that always sticks in my mind is when I was studying a master's in organization development and human resources. And the program that I was in that was very hands-on, and there was a lot of classes around individuals and change and group dynamics and team effectiveness and leadership and dealing with conflict and personality types. And one of the practices that happened in every single class in that whole program is that you had to have a team project, and that since everyone had been through the same foundational concepts, we learned very early on that you had to spend a lot of time coming together and forming as a team to really understand personal goals, strengths, weaknesses, how you handle stress, how you handle conflict, and making sure the team as a group really understood how they would work well together and how they would balance each other out. And I had one capstone project at the end of the year that was half MBA students and half the organization development students. And the teacher made the assignment, everyone broke into their groups, and it was really fascinating. All the OD students who'd gone through this educational experience over multiple years and had been through these experiences of team building, they all spent time really trying to figure out how we were going to work together as a team since we were a new group, what everyone wanted to do, how we're going to collaborate, and really getting to know each other. And this actually took sometimes 2 or 3 different sessions of getting together where we didn't get into any of the content whatsoever. It was all forming as a team. And then we looked across the room at the MBA students, and they all got their assignment. They whipped out their calendars and very quickly said, I'll do this section, you do that section, here we go, we'll meet up on this day, we'll pull it all together, and then we'll be done. And they were out the door in about 20 minutes, and they skipped over this critical relationship building exercise. And what's fascinating, fast forward to the end of the semester, everyone's coming in to hand in their projects, and consistently every single one of the teams that had OD students that had gone through the relationship building exercises came in laughing and relaxed and having fun, and people had been to happy hours. Everyone was excited about the final project and thought it was really great. And we looked over at the MBA students who had skipped over this critical thing, and every single one of those teams came in, they were mad at each other, they were stressed. A couple of the teams actually went to the professor and tried to say, hey, these folks should get a lower grade because they didn't contribute, or we did so much more. And it was just a horrific experience. And it really stuck in my mind just how critical that relationship building is, and that you need to do that right up front to really have a great experience and to really have a productive team. And so many folks skip that. And I share that now to sort of guide this conversation when we think through how do we go about building effective relationships with customers, and what's the impact when we do it well, and what's the downside when we don't do it at all. So that's just something that I thought would really be helpful, and to get people to really think about that. And with sort of that as a backdrop, Jason, coming back to you, let me ask you, what are trusted relationships, and why are they so important?
I love that story, Jason. I think it's so relevant. It really leads me to kind of one key thing to think about, and it's make sure that you build the relationships before you need them. I think we all have challenges with customers, with relationships, but the time to build a relationship is not when you're in a conflict situation, and that will always happen. So it really is putting that time up front, and that is an investment. It's a cost, but you need to do it. And I think that is so critical to building those relationships. I think when you look at what are trusted relationships, ultimately they are relationships between two parties that are of mutual benefit, and a partnership of equals is something that I often talk about, and I like to think of them as partnerships. And that I think is really, really important. You know, contracts are between companies, and we have those for legal, commercial points of view, but the relationships are between people, and the trust ultimately is between people. I think it's so important to know the difference between the two. We often hear about customer success managers or customer success professionals being referred to as the customer's trusted advisor. I'm not convinced it's the right term, but it is something that we hear a lot, and I think there is some element to it, element of truth to it. But my question would be, what are you there advising them about? You're not necessarily just the trusted advisor. So I'd always put some caution to using that, but it's something that is very common in industry. I think that the key thing with relationships is that they are ongoing, unlike contracts. And although a customer may churn, an organization may churn, and the contract might finish, the relationship could still be continuing. And that relationship, that customer can refer people in the future to you. They can also help you with your next opportunities. They can be an advocate. So really make sure that you are aware that relationships continue. I was at a conference on the future of customer experience a few weeks back. And there was a phenomenal speaker there from, I think he was from over in Norway, but talking about an idea that he's been working on for the last few years called the endings, and how a lot of organizations and businesses, people generally don't think about endings when they're planning things. So there are many organizations that put the effort, the focus on the onboarding, the customer journey, and while you're a customer, but there's very little time, effort, consequence thought about how do we end that relationship properly. And it is a relationship, and it's so important to think about that. So when contracts do end, make sure you end the relationship or continue the relationship appropriately. And I think that's so important to take into consideration. I really like that idea there. I think what you often find, relationships are soft skills focused. They're not just about numbers, but they are often the hardest part to do in any customer relationship. So quite often there are gaps in our knowledge around soft skills when it comes to relationships. So you've got to understand these things. And there's a lot of time we can spend training around soft skills, which I think really adds to it. It's interesting because there is a whole industry that's been built up around customer relationship management, good old CRM. And that's been around now for a long time. I think Salesforce celebrated their 20th anniversary only a few weeks back, which is a phenomenal milestone. But CRM is customer relationship management. So it's all about these relationships. But the focus with organizations that do CRM platforms has traditionally and more typically been around sales, around that initial engagement, with less emphasis on the ongoing relationships. And I think we're beginning now to see a shift when you've got the likes of Gainsight, Tango, Natero, Client Success, these guys focusing a lot more on customer success management, where the ongoing relationship is key. So you're really seeing a shift there, which is really important. I think some key things to think about for your customers is your clients or your customers need to know that you as their relationship person are there. You can solve problems and deliver the results they want. And that is really important. That's the value they want for you. They've bought into us as an organization to bring some value, and be able to demonstrate that through solving problems and delivering value and results is really critical. Our customers all take on a significant amount of risk when they bring us in. And I think it's something that we lose sight of. So that sale, some of it's based on risk. There's an element of risk they're taking, saying yes to it. Yes, they've signed a contract, but they're also putting their own reputation within their organization at risk. So you've got to be very conscious about that. And I think when you start the relationship as a customer success professional, consider that and make sure that you understand that there is a challenge to start with, and that you've very quickly got to build that relationship up, and that quite often our customers won't agree to doing actions that they need to do that will make them successful without that trust there. So really focus on that to start with. I think we've talked before, you and I, Jason, on this, but effective customer success is when you ask your customers to do something new and different that they haven't done before. And we need them to take potentially brand new actions that they haven't done before that's going to achieve success. And they simply won't do it if they don't trust you. The clients need to believe that we have got the expertise that they don't have, and that we're acting in their best interest for this, not just our interest. And I think that's so important to consider that we're taking them on a journey and asking them to do things differently. You've got to consider that. And without that trust, I think it's very difficult to do. And I think as anybody in customer success, as a customer success professional, you need to consider that you are actually going in, acting in the customer's best interest. And that's fundamental. So that has to be forefront of what you're doing, not your interest, but the customer's best interest. And that really helps with that relationship there. And also the tangible benefits that we see from good relationships, trusted relationships. There's increased value that we're getting from customers. There'll be increased revenue. You also get cost savings and efficiencies there. And I think it's really important. And relationships are something that are very, very challenging, but when they're done properly, when you invest the time, exactly as you said at the beginning, there's a really good upside to them. I think I'm going to throw a question back to you, Jason. And if we are talking about customer success managers as our trusted advisors, kind of do you see it? I mentioned briefly, but do you think that thinking is correct, that they are trusted advisors for our customers? And then what about the idea about being trust advocates for our own organizations?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jason. I think it's interesting that you hear the term trusted advisor so often, and yet, I think people, I think the term's highly overused, and I think people may aspire to be that trusted advisor, but I don't think they necessarily know what that means or the steps they need to take to earn the trust, because you can't just claim to be a trusted advisor, and you're certainly not bestowed that by the nature of your role. It's something that's built up through that relationship, and it's so important that you take those steps and actions to build up the trust. But I think it's also important that you understand that you are a trusted advisor within the lens of your product or service. I will take your advice on X, Y, and Z because you've done this with a lot of other customers. You know your product, you know your industry, and you may have had some experience or insights that I don't have. So I will defer to you on some things as I go through. But I prefer the term trusted partners too, because I think that really comes back to the relationship between a customer success manager and the client. To your point, it has to be mutual, it has to be mutually beneficial. So you're partners in this journey. And I think the more that you can realize as a customer success manager that, you can't be successful if your customer's not successful. It's only through their success that you will achieve your own success. Your interests are very aligned. Jason, we were talking the other day too, and we thought it was interesting how you very rarely hear of like a trusted salesperson or a trusted account manager. I think people, by the role, and there's an expectation that you'll be trusted, but customers don't always have that trust with every role in your organization, or the individuals there. So you really need to be aware of that. And I think that comes to a bigger point, which comes back to the idea that, the relationship that your customer has, yes, there's a relationship with you, but they also have a relationship with the rest of your organization. And it's very important that you become that trust advocate internally to make sure that everyone in your organization is acting in a way that will build and reinforce trust, so that your sales and account managers are doing that. That they're, for sales folks, they're not overselling the customer on things that they don't need or won't use to make a quick sale, when that will definitely hurt everyone at the renewal time. And that selling people things they don't need is a quick way to destroy trust. So making sure that the rest of your organization is working is really important. And I think it's also, something that's very important is when you see people as a trust advocate within your organization that may be acting in a way that is hurting trust or destroying trust, they may not even be aware that they're doing it, but someone's got to raise up and say, hey, we've got a problem here, and call people out and call the organization out and say, let's take a lesson here and say, if I'm the customer, these actions seen through this lens look very untrustworthy and not in my best interest. So how do we address that, and where do we need to go? So I think being a trusted advisor is key, earning that right to be that trusted. And I think, you hit on another key point, Jason, which is you need to have the expertise and value that you can bring for the customers that they don't have for themselves. And when you can demonstrate that to them and show the value and show that not only are you making them successful, you're de-risking their working with you. You're helping advance them in their own organization and making them look good in front of their peers and their boss. All of those things are activities that help build trust. I think that's so critical to get there. So I think that's my thought on those ideas. But let me sort of flip this around to you. Maybe you can carry on here. How do you go about building a trusted relationship, especially if you can talk to the medium and high touch customers? Low touch is a different situation entirely as well too.
I think it's a great question. This is kind of a lot of the intro we've talked about, kind of the challenges you've got, why you need to do it. the how to is often the hardest bit. So thank you for giving me that question. I think one of the key things I say is be patient. And I think that there's pros and cons to that. You know, obviously you can't build a really good trusted relationship overnight. It does take time. We've talked about it earlier on, but the flip side of that is, how do you get your organization to understand that it takes time, and what are the short-term things you can do? I think there are a number of key things here, right? And some things that you absolutely have to do: build rapport, agree the purpose of what we're delivering to the organization, make sure that the stakeholder, the customer person that we're speaking to knows what we're doing, understand roles. So what are roles and responsibilities, both for us and for our different customers, the stakeholders there, and also the process of how we're going to work together, including communications channels, communication frequency, kind of escalation points, messages they need, the consistency around it. And that's so important to do. And I think only once they're done, can you then start looking at the specific tasks and actions you're going to do. I think you need to be, both parties, be very open, honest, completely transparent and vulnerable with your customers. Make sure you show your true self to a certain extent. And I think that showing your true self and what the challenges you are, what your expectations are, what your priorities are, what the expectations are for you within your organization, and what the expectations are for our customer within their organization, can really help build up that relationship and allow others to trust you more. I think something that you and I have spoke about before, Jason, is the idea of a customer charter. And I really, really like this. I was speaking to someone only the other day. The idea of a kind of a program, a project charter, is something that's deeply ingrained in many of the project management methodologies and frameworks out there. And it's that document that you put up front at the beginning of a project, where you define who the stakeholders are, what the risks are, what the outcomes are, what the values they're delivering are, communication channels, what the strengths, weaknesses are, the financial side of it, but also how you're going to resolve challenges, how you're going to resolve conflicts and escalation. So it ultimately sums up how we're going to work together. And I think translating that to the world of customer success, you have a customer charter. And I think it's a really, really important document, and something I'd really encourage people to start thinking about. It doesn't have to be kind of war and peace. It could just be a simple one pager that covers these key things on, and do it as an extension of what your customer outcomes are. But define all these touch points, the expectations for both parties. And in this, I think you can really explicitly state for both parties, or all the people involved, what are the things that are going to make each other successful within their own organization. So for my customer, how do I make them look good? How do I make them get that promotion, get that pay rise? How are they being evaluated internally? And vice versa, do it with us. I think make sure that our customers know what we're targeted on, which is really important. And you can ask very specific things that the other party, the other person can do to make them successful, and document that in the charter. I think consistency in how we provide and deliver communications, and in how we deliver services across the whole organization, is so key. So customer consistency for communications isn't just about customer success, it's about the rest of the business. And as you mentioned earlier on, Jason, that trust advocate within the organization, it's important to make sure you agree internally what the expectations are and what that message and communication is with the customer. I think that's so important. I think part of our role is all about sharing knowledge and feedback. So when things do well, when things go right, we want to tell customers, and equally when there's bad news to share, when things don't work as well as they should do, on both sides, share that. It's important to learn from that. So be very part of that openness and transparency, is the ability to do that. I think also, we said earlier on, try and think about partnerships. These are ongoing relationships. This isn't something where I'm just picking up the phone, having this initial engagement, and then going to speak to you in a year's time. We're here about an ongoing relationship. So start thinking about what is in this partnership relationship, and how do I make it mutually beneficial. Something that quite often is difficult to do, particularly for people early on in their career, is saying no to a customer. Even saying no, and not taking on too many pieces of work. But I think we know what the remit of our deliverables is for the customer. We know what the expectations are if you've documented them and agreed them. But also, you know when the customer shouldn't come to you. We've talked before about the idea of customer success being a facilitator in a business. How do I make sure my customer doesn't overuse customer success for support, doesn't overuse it for training, and goes through the right ways? Because that's mutually beneficial for them. So it's really important to do that. And at the same time, make sure you deliver on what the expectations are. We've set out the expectations and deliver to them and get that agreement as to what they are. And don't necessarily exceed those expectations. There's always a need and a time when we will need to exceed them, and you can put a commercial justification around it, but don't make that your default de facto stance. I think we all want to consider going the extra mile when it's appropriate. These are professional relationships. Bear in mind, it might not always be appropriate to go out for a drink, to go out for a beer with our customers. Excuse me. But you can consider things like team-based activities, which are really important, and even more so when we're looking at longer-term relationships with customers. I think it builds that element of collaboration, all the teams working together. I'd always say don't forget the importance of personalizing the content and communication for your customers. Everybody's got their own style. You can document that in your customer charter, but that's really important. The last point I'd add is if or even when something goes wrong, and we all know things go wrong, we've all had challenges with every service product we've worked with, make sure you're completely honest. Tell your customer about it, tell them when it happens, and tell them what you're going to do about it, who you're going to speak to within the organization to get it resolved, what the next steps are, and when, and be very, very transparent about it. And that goes back to that open and honest conversation. I think that is so important. I think that there's some of the key points and some of the takeaways there that really can help build those relationships. What I'd like to throw back to you, Jason, is almost the opposite question. What can happen and what should people avoid to do that starts breaking trusted relationships and can almost kill that trust with our customers?
Yeah, that's so important to focus on that too, because I think people slowly recognize that it does take time to build relationships, and it's so much effort to really get that trust once you're there, but you can destroy it in an instant. And sometimes when you destroy it, you can never get it back. And you see that in your personal relationships, you see that in professional relationships, and you definitely see it with clients and customers as well too. And I think there's a lot of different things, and sometimes people recognize it when it's happened, but don't know how they got there, especially if you're in a stressful project. But one of the big ones for me is when you don't follow whatever your agreed collaboration approach is and communication approach. And I think that's why that charter that you talk about is so important. And it's so important because not just what's written down on paper, which is a great artifact to refer back to when you're not sure of what you're doing, but the process of developing that is where you start to build the relationships and the trust. And you talk openly with someone about how you're going to communicate. Do I copy other people? Do I copy your boss? How will we handle when sensitive issues come up? Because they always come up in big, difficult projects. And with IT projects, there's a lot at stake here. You're changing people's jobs and how they do their jobs and what means to be good at your job. These are stressful topics that are going to come up, and there's often a lot of effort and money and professional risk involved. That people have a lot on the line here, and people get very sensitive. And there's a lot of internal politics with your customers that you will never be aware of, that you can accidentally step on someone's toes when you're trying to be supportive and not even realize it. So I think one of the first ones then is definitely make sure that you're collaborating in the right way, and that once you've agreed processes for communication, agreed processes for how you're going to share bad information and who gets to be included on that, and making sure you're doing it in a way that's also fair to you and professionally ethical for you, because again, this has to be a partnership. But if you've figured out how you're going to do that, make sure you follow those processes. And I think there's also, when you're working with teams, making sure that the people on your team and the other teams, that everyone's acting in that professional, ethical way, and ask the question, is this the right thing to do? Are we being ethical? Is this professional? Is this acceptable? We've talked sometimes, sales and account management often get, thrown under the bus for a lot of things. But, if they're acting in a way when they're no longer as closely involved with the customer after a sale, that they are not aware that they're doing something that may be viewed negatively by the client, or that they're acting in a way that makes your job harder, you've got to have a mechanism by which you can communicate that back, and if necessary, escalate it internally to executives to address these situations, because it's so critical. I think the other piece too is if you encounter a situation where it's dicey or someone's not collaborating, even if it's the customer, you've got to call them out. And if you don't call people out and say, hey, we agreed we're going to collaborate some way, and it seems that didn't happen in the situation. I want to discuss that to make sure that my assumption is that this was merely an oversight and an accident, not an intentional issue. But I want to talk about it because this happened, and we need to figure out how we're going to collaborate going forward, because something like this, if it was intentional, would destroy trust for both of us. It just have that conversation very directly, and it's not necessarily a fun conversation to have, but coming out the other side is very, very important. So making sure that you call people out, whether it's your team, your organization, or even your customer around that. And I think another issue here too is if you ever catch someone or get caught lying or acting in an unethical way, that will destroy trust in a second. And there've been many times when, I've encountered things. So for example, I've been on calls where someone thought they hung up the conference call and they didn't, and I heard individuals speaking and saying things that were in direct violation to agreed norms and activities, and threw several people under the bus. That was completely inappropriate and unprofessional, and they had no idea that they did that. They were completely unaware. So, I was aware of the situation, and in those cases, I didn't call them out, but the trust was destroyed and was never regained. And looking back, I probably should have just gone to those people and said, hey, what are you doing here? This is a violation of trust. Let's talk about this and resolve this issue. And I think, especially in professional relationships where if you've lost trust, but you still are required to work with these people, that can be a very difficult situation. You've got to have those conversations around that. And similarly, I've seen situations where been on projects where people are traveling and, you'll go out to a restaurant or maybe in the hotel bar later and talking even just about, within their own project team, without the customer there, and the next day going in and say, oh, someone overheard you talking about X, Y, and Z, and it got back to the client VP, and now everyone's really, really upset. So we need to have a discussion on that. So also being aware of your surroundings to make sure, even when you think you're having a private conversation, you may not be. And if there's a reason that you need to have a private conversation, if it's just gossiping, that's usually a warning sign that you've got some issues that you need to address with your team or your client to make sure that you're acting in a trust-building way. And then I think finally another big one is failing to perform ongoing relationship maintenance. It can be a slow death towards destroying trust. So what I mean by that is you spend a lot of time and effort figuring out how you're going to collaborate, but you do need to have time where you don't focus on work, product, and deliverable. You actually do a check-in with your team, with your partners, with your customer, with your project sponsor, whoever it may be, and just say, hey, how are we doing here? Are we still communicating effectively? How are you feeling about this relationship? Are there things that are making you sour on it? Are there things that we can do differently to help build trust to be more effective going forward? And I think, if you don't do that, it can really come back and bite you. So there's a lot of stuff that people do or forget to do that really break trust. And it's so important to make sure that doesn't happen, because it really can impact everything else you do from that point forward. So it's just my thoughts on those. But Jason, I'm wondering, maybe coming back to you, can you share with us, what are some of your best practices or experiences in how to positively manage, transitions and turnover of lead contacts at a customer, or even turnover within your own staff? So you may have a situation, you've invested a lot of energy, you've built up trust, you've had good working relationships, and now someone is leaving. How do you handle that?
The first thing I'd say is that this always happens. We've all seen it. We know key contacts and customers leave, so it isn't something to be frightened about almost. And also there are changes on our side. So we know that people move on, they progress, they get promotions, even leave the organization, new people come in. So my first point is don't be worried when it happens. It's a perfectly normal piece of business development and growth. I think the most fundamental thing is that it comes back to the fundamental stages of group development. And anyone who's studied group psychology, kind of these stages are the good old forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, one that was added later on. And you've got to go back to basics. And when there's any change, particularly in a key stakeholder, you are beginning again with that relationship. So you've got to consider that we're going back to that forming stage. What is the relationship about? What are the expectations? How do we make that person successful? So everything we've talked about already, you've got to start that again. So do not be frightened if it happens, but be very conscious that you've almost got to go back to basics. Now, you may find that it will be quicker the second time that you have this new team. You've done it already. Some of the things may not change. Ultimately what we're delivering to the organization is probably still the same, but the way we're working, the style of communication will change. So just be very, very conscious about that and think about group formation, group development. And if you're not aware of it, there's a lot of writing and documentation done on this, the forming, storming, norming, performing stages of group development. So I'd really encourage all the listeners to go and have a look at this if you're not aware of it. The second thing I'd say is really communicate. You cannot over communicate. If someone on your side is leaving, Make sure you tell the customer well in advance. For the customer, it should be a non-event. It shouldn't matter, just be transparent about it. What the customer wants to know is when the change is going to happen, have the introduction to the person, get to meet that person, and for them to be reassured that there's no change in the level of service. And that's super important. And also what the plan around it is. I think if your customer contact's leaving, one of the challenges you've got is that often we don't know. And I've been in situations where you turn up one day and your key stakeholder who did the original contract has gone on, your champion's left. So you're almost having to start again then. One thing I'd always say is link up with your contacts at your customers on LinkedIn. It's great to help build that relationship, but quite often LinkedIn can be that first trigger warning that something's happened, the person's moving on. You don't want it to be, but quite often these conversations that you don't have with your customer. So just be very conscious about that, but also be very open with your customer. Let them share problems and challenges with you. You want to understand if they're moving on. So if there is going to be a change on their side, the sooner you can know about it, the better. I'd always say put it into, we talked about the customer charter earlier on, put this into the charter so that if someone on either side leaves, there's a process that you've agreed to in terms of what the communication plans are, in terms of how to do it, and so that you get that advance notification. I think that's really important. I think when you come in as a new customer success professional on an account with a customer, I'd always make sure you review the history of the customer, of the account with you, ask about different replacements within the organization, how have things changed within the business, what's happening with the business, what are the different priorities, understand what their business goals are, how are they aligned with what the historically stated goals that you may have in your customer charter or through your sales team might be. Do they still stand? So that discovery process to review and understand the customer and the history of the account is super critical. I think understand as well what the new contacts, both short-term and long-term priorities are, and explicitly ask them what you can do to make them successful. So that same conversation we've had before, but what does it, this is a different person now, what are they being judged on? What are they being measured against? How do we make them successful? And what do they need to do? But you need to understand what if they've come into it, they may have a very different set of short-term goals. Let's understand what those are. And I think also, as I said earlier on, there are some things that won't have changed. The contract is probably still the same contract. We've just got a different contact. So we're still delivering the same core services. As Jason said about the internal side of it, make sure you're sharing these changes internally. And I think they're really super important. It's that open, honest communications, put process around it to give yourself the time to build those relationships. But go back to the beginning, assume that it's going to be a brand new relationship that you need to build, which I think is so important. A question I'm going to throw back to you, Jason. How would you introduce new relationships and build that trust and act as that trusted advisor when they're an existing account? So say we've got a customer, it might be a long-term customer and we've had a good relationship with, been delivering services to, for whatever reason, me as the customer success person has moved on, there's a new person coming in. How do you introduce that new relationship and how do you build those new services? Or even if you're building out new services from the business, what are the sort of steps you can take?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different situations from, the one you just hit on of a new customer success manager is taking over the account and they've got to work from scratch. Or the other one that's also very common is, we've just really launched or we're relaunching our customer success services. We need to set new expectations for what that means and why we're doing this and how we're doing it. So I think an easy first step is do your analysis first and really go in and try to figure out the who, what, when, where, and why. When was the last contact? Tell me about my customer. Let me learn from other existing people within my organization, the sales rep. What's the history of this account? What's working well? What isn't? And really what's needed next and what are the problems that they're having or where are things going absolutely fantastic. And then trying to figure out, who's the right person to engage with them. So if you're coming as a new customer success manager, maybe you get someone else to introduce you and to bring you in to start the relationship. Maybe it's a salesperson, maybe it's the outgoing customer success manager, whoever it may be. Or if you're rolling out a new customer success service to existing accounts, you may need to have all of your customer success managers go and try and introduce, here's the new service. You're going to hear a big announcement. Let me explain what's coming and why and what that needs to look like. So that you can understand what's going on. Try and figure out who's the right person to have the conversation for the situation that you're going through and what it's going to look like. But when you do go in and get introduced to them, help them understand what's the value that you're providing either through your role as a new customer success manager or the team's role as you're launching a new customer success service. Here's the value we're trying to bring. Here's why we're doing this. Here's what's going on. And really let them know, what's sort of the reason for this and why they should care and how it's going to benefit them. And I think part of this you talked about as well too, Jason, which is, but set accurate expectations and set expectations for what's not changing and how your customer success service may fit with the rest of your organization. So here are the things that support will still do. Here's the stuff that sales and your account manager will still do. Here's what I'm doing that maybe they've done before. Here's what's changing, but here's what's staying the same and where you still go. So the customer really has a sense of some stability, but also a sense of improvement. So it's not just everything's up in the wind. And I think the big thing though is really discussing with them why they're doing this. What's the problem they're trying to solve, and what's the impact them going to be? And if necessary, even write down some key talking points or scripts about this and say, these are the main things I need you to understand. But part of that though, this is a giant trust building exercise. So if there have been problems, be overt and clear about them. Say, look, I know we've had problems with this account before, and you were frustrated by X, Y, and Z, or we didn't deliver these fixes that we thought we would, or there were technical issues with whatever it may be, or whatever the situation was. But just get it out there. It's a professional conversation. It's not a personal issue around this, but this is your chance to build a personal relationship. And to build trust. So just put it out there and talk about it and acknowledge it and sort of say, these are the steps we're going to take to try and address this, or this will probably be an issue for a while, even though we would like to resolve it quickly, and here's why. And I think that's really, really important, because you don't want to oversell, and you want to set expectations that things will take time, and this is new and different, and that it will continue to evolve in some form or fashion as you learn what's most effective and most needed by customers as well. So being pretty clear on that here's where it's going to go. And I think another thing to remember is a lot of your customers, they work with multiple vendors, and they are probably experiencing different flavors of customer success from all different vendors. So if they have other software vendors that have a customer success service, you can even ask them and say, have you had a similar service to ours as I've just described it with your other vendors? How did that work for you? What worked well, what didn't? Or, oh, you've had a customer success service, but it was very, very different. Oh, that's how this vendor does it. Yeah, here are the things that we're probably not going to do that they're doing. Here are things you should expect from us that they may not be doing. So let's talk about that. And just really set some expectations, because you're not just dealing with their experience with you, but you're dealing with their experience with other software vendors and other similar type services, that you've got to make sure that you're clear about what you're doing and what you're not doing. And then I think finally, another thing here is they'll probably have questions, or in some cases, they may even have some pushback. So think about what questions they'll ask or what pushback they'll have, and sort of make sure you're ready to respond accordingly. And actually up on my company website, on the Tritones website, we've got a free guide around some questions that you could expect software buyers to ask their vendors about their customer success service. And I think there's like 35 questions that most software buyers will ask some form of flavor of them. Go and download that. It'll help you understand some ideas that you can expect and how you may want to respond to those. So those are just a few things that you can do when introducing relationships and trust and going through to begin with. But I think switching back to gears, a lot of what we've just talked about here in your previous question was around medium and high touch, where you're really investing a lot of time. You do get to know your customers and get to know them individually. Jason, can you tell us, how do you go about building trusting relationship with low touch customers, or the situation where I'm a customer success manager and I've got a large number of accounts? I don't have the time to spend in detail with every single customer. What do I do then?
I think this is a huge challenge, and what you find is that it's almost the long tail of your customers quite often is underserved, underserviced. There are many organizations where these customers just don't have a customer success manager. So it's a very, very different level of service that you're providing, and they've got different expectations. So it is a real big challenge. And I think there's a number of different ideas. I think you've got to look that some of these customers may only get one or two comms from a person, so human touches, so to speak, once or twice a year, that are only 20, 30 minutes long. So it's very, very different to having that regular catch up with a dedicated customer success manager, someone coming on site. So they're very, very different. And I think given that, you've got to be very realistic about what level of trust can actually be built around that relationship, and what level of trust is needed. It's a very different type of customer. And I think instead of those kind of ongoing phone calls, video calls, or relationship meetings on site, just look at what you can do around establishing a solid rapport with a customer, and how you can do that best. And building that really good rapport is probably the best thing you can do and do really well. And I think to do that, you want to set the context correctly, ask the right questions, use active listening. So really be there as a listener for your customer, understanding what the challenges are, when they need you. It tends to be more reactive. But I've always worked the idea, we all know about the tech touch approach in customer success. For me, I prefer a tech-enabled approach, which is you use a tech model, but you've built into it kind of automated trigger points that bring in a human and person-to-person contact at the right point when certain events happen. I think that adds a far more value in there and a lot more around the relationship. So I'd really encourage you to look at that approach rather than just relying on technology. Of course, it's dependent on resources, so you've got to look at what you can do there, which I think is really important. I think you've got to make sure that you still align all of your communication channels, all of the conversations for your low-touch customers, all the different engagement activities, be it video, email, marketing communications. Make sure they're still all consistent, but you also want that overall experience that you're providing with the customers to still be positive. So make sure that the tone is correct, the tone achieves what you want. You may need some more alignment with your marketing team are saying to make sure you've got the right message there. And even if a lot of the work and the communications are through self-service portals, self-service guides. Jason, you talked earlier on about some of the documents that you through Tritons have got. If people use kind of those, make sure the tone in those documents is consistent, because that can help generate that right message there. I think you've got to make sure that you've got really tight alignment with other parts of the business. So if we look at support, account management, your renewals team, if there is a separate team, make sure everybody understands what that overall experience needs to be, what the expectations are for the customer, so you can all deliver to that. And I think I'd end this kind of question by saying that always bear in mind that today's low touch customer, these guys that don't have that relationship, what you want them to do is ultimately be upgraded and become tomorrow's tech or high touch customer. Sorry, not tech touch. You want them to move into a big upgrade. So there's a huge upsell piece you have to do. So if you build that relationship at the right level, you drive that right level of experience, you're providing that fundamental foundation that how you can establish really good levels of trust that then serve later for a more medium or high touch model. I'd really be very conscious of that. Was there anything you'd add to that, Jason?
No, I think you really covered it well. I mean, the low touch is so different, but building that rapport and having the experience be generally positive, that a customer is excited to upgrade, and when they're aware that okay, now I'm in a higher touch, that they already feel some nature of goodwill is just absolutely incredible. So, thank you for all of your thoughts on that. And I see that we're just about out of time here, Jason. So maybe if you could go ahead for us and just give us a quick recap of the bold challenge question and any key points that we want to make sure that people leave this session with.
Absolutely. And this is something, as I said, that if our regular listeners know, we want you to take away a bold challenge question. And what we're also going to do, and we'll do this with all the webinars going forward, is going to give you 3 key takeaways. And we'll also post these in the LinkedIn group. So the 3 key takeaways from us, if we go back to how do you build those trusted relationships? The first one is invest upfront in building a relationship. And that cannot be underestimated. Yes, it's a cost, but it's so important to do. You've got to consider how that works within your organization, what commitment you need, but also how you sell that internally. But you need that investment upfront in building the relationship. The second point is develop and establish a customer success or even a customer charter, whatever you want to call it. But it's a charter geared at how we build these relationships with our customers. So yes, it could be part of your required outcomes documentation and deliverables, but it addresses the relationships, not just the activities, deliverables, and outcomes. It talks about communication styles, expectations, as we said. And the third and final takeaway I'd really re-emphasize is you to become the trust advocate within your organization. Excuse me. And really, you as the customer's success person, be there to drive and champion the business value internally of how important trusted relationships are with customers. And as you said in your point earlier on, Jason, make sure that you're holding your internal team, not just customer success, to account. When things go wrong, call it out, explain to people why it's gone wrong, what the impact are. And the other way around, when things have done really well, really tell people about that and really exemplify what good looks like. So they're the 3 key takeaways that I'd really say. I think going back to what the be bold question that we had was, was what will you do differently in relationships with your customers from tomorrow? And as we said, we will send out the comms that's got the LinkedIn group in it. Please do come back to us with your thoughts about what you're going to do differently. And we'd really want this to be a conversation. So we'd love ideas that you've had that have worked in line with what we've said. If there's other ideas you've got, please put them there. Everybody, a big thank you from myself and for Jason for joining us. We really enjoyed this. It's been a great conversation. The prep for it's been fun as well. I think these are some challenging conversations we have. The questions that we get in are great. It really makes us think and puts us on our feet. And these conversations that we have are really great. So we hope you found the conversation useful and relevant to you and your company. And don't forget, you can register for our upcoming webinars. We are doing these once a month. The next one we've got scheduled for, I think it's the 16th of April, Jason. And it's
yes, I believe it is.
Everything to do with the financial side of customer success. So we look forward to seeing you all join us then. And please do, if there's any questions you've got around that one, please do let us know beforehand. Thank you very much, everyone.